Today you will hear a story that defies logic. The testimony of Karim al-Rahman, a feared Pakistani judge who, for more than 20 years, signed death sentences against Christians, believing he was serving God. The turning point began the day he ordered the execution of an entire Christian family, innocent and unjustly accused of blasphemy. That same night, tormented by doubt, Karim went on YouTube and clicked on a video by Charlie Kirk, an American speaking about faith, freedom, and forgiveness. He did not know it yet, but that simple click would mark the beginning of the greatest spiritual battle of his life, a struggle between law and grace, fear and love, religion and truth. That decision almost cost him his life. And before we begin, make sure you are already subscribed, leave a like, and tell us in the comments which city you are watching from, because what happens next will challenge your faith.
My name is Karim al-Rahman, and for many years I believed I was the very embodiment of justice. When I walked through the corridors of the Lahore courthouse, people lowered their heads. Judges respected me, lawyers feared me, and the accused trembled when my name was announced. I was the man no one dared to challenge. The black robe I wore every day gave me an almost divine feeling, as if, when I sat in that chair, I became the voice of God on earth. I was raised to believe this was my purpose. My father was a renowned scholar of the Quran, my grandfather a judge during British rule. Since childhood, I was told that justice was the destiny of chosen men, and that I had been called to protect the faith. I believed it with all my strength. My life was meticulously controlled. The schedule of prayers, the readings of the Quran, the religious discussions at the dinner table, everything followed an almost military ritual. Religion was the axis of my existence, and within that structure, Christians were seen as a threat. In my convictions, they represented the danger of the West, the silent enemy infiltrated among us. When someone was accused of blasphemy, I did not see a human being before me. I saw a traitor to Islam. Article 295C of the Penal Code, which prescribed the death penalty for such cases, was the weapon I proudly wielded. With every signature on a death sentence, I felt I was purifying the nation. At home, the atmosphere was different, and at the same time the same. My wife Aisha was a woman of faith, submissive to tradition, but I could see in her eyes a constant fear. She spoke little and observed much. My 3 children lived between respect and silence. When I entered the room, conversation stopped. They knew their father did not tolerate questions, not even curiosity. I was the provider, the leader, the example. Laughter seemed like weakness, affection a distraction. Rigidity was the foundation of my home. But behind my speeches of authority, something began to stir. Small cracks were forming in the walls of my certainty. I remember one night, returning from court, still carrying the weight of the day's decisions, I found Fatima, my eldest daughter, reading a Christian book that a classmate had lent her. I tore it from her hands and threw it into the fireplace. She cried, but said nothing. It was the first time I noticed her eyes looked at me differently, not with fear but with sadness. That disturbed me more than I wanted to admit. From that moment on, something inside me began to move. During trials, I found myself distracted by details I had once ignored. The desperate expressions of the accused, the trembling hands of their wives, the weeping of mothers in the galleries. I tried to harden my heart, but the more I repressed compassion, the more it returned like an annoying voice whispering through the night. I fought against that feeling, believing it was a spiritual trap, a temptation to lead me away from the path of righteousness. I began to intensify my prayers. I fasted more. I read the sacred texts with almost desperate devotion, like someone trying to extinguish a fire with his bare hands, but the fire only grew. In moments of solitude, I wondered if the God I served truly rejoiced in the blood of the condemned. That doubt terrified me. It felt as if admitting such a thought would mean betraying everything I had built. It was during that time that I received the case that would change everything. It was August of 2018, a suffocating summer in Lahore. The streets boiled with heat and political tension. When the case arrived on my desk, it seemed like just another among hundreds. 7 Christians from the same family, humble workers from a nearby village, had been accused of blasphemy after an argument over well water. I barely read the details. The custom was simple. The Muslim accuser claimed to have heard insults against the Prophet. The defendant denied it, and I applied the law. It had always been that way. I saw no reason to change. However, something about that case disturbed me from the very beginning. Perhaps it was the face of the family's patriarch, Samuel Marcy, a man with calloused hands and a serene gaze, even knowing he might die. Perhaps it was the way his sons held their wives' hands, as if saying, "Do not cry, God is with us." That serenity irritated me deeply. I could not understand how someone could remain calm in the face of death. To me, that was arrogance, a challenge. But deep down, what I truly felt was fear. Fear of seeing in them something I did not possess. During the trial, I noticed that the witnesses constantly contradicted themselves. One said the insult was spoken in the morning. Another claimed it was at night. One pointed to Samuel as the author. Another blamed the son. In any other type of case, I would have ordered it to be dismissed. But in blasphemy cases, logic did not matter. The public demanded blood, and I, driven by pride, decided to give them the spectacle they wanted. When I announced that the verdict would be delivered in a few days, the streets around the courthouse filled with demonstrators. I saw banners with my name, words of praise, and I felt my chest swell. The nation called me the defender of the faith. I fed on that title like one intoxicated by power. But at home, Aisha's silence became unbearable. One night, while I reviewed the final documents, she entered my office and placed a tray of tea on the table. She stood there for a few seconds looking at the papers. Then, with a trembling voice, she asked, "Are you sure this is justice, Karim?" That question cut through me like a blade. I did not answer right away. Pretending to be irritated, I said yes, that justice was the foundation of my faith. But for the first time, my hands were trembling. She left in silence, and I stayed there, staring at the paper that carried the signatures of the accused and wondering what it truly meant to be just. That night, sleep did not come. I walked through the house, felt the weight of the heat, the distant sound of prayers echoing from the mosque, and, on impulse, I opened the computer. I used to watch political videos and international debates to distract my mind. The algorithm somehow led me to a video titled, "Why Christians Don't Fear Death, Charlie Kirk." I had never heard that name before. The thumbnail showed a young American man speaking passionately before an audience. Out of curiosity, or perhaps something greater, I clicked. His voice was calm yet firm. He spoke about freedom, about how true faith is not based on the fear of punishment, but on the certainty of love. I should have closed the video immediately, but something stopped me. As he quoted passages about forgiveness and grace, I felt something I could not name. It was as if someone were opening a window inside of me. He spoke of a Jesus who loved his enemies, who forgave those who persecuted him, who offered mercy even to those who crucified him. I found myself comparing that image to my own heart, cold, hard, and thirsty for vengeance. When the video ended, I stood still in silence, staring at the reflection of the dark screen. The house was asleep, but something inside me had awakened. I tried to pray, but no words came out. For the first time, I felt shame when I looked at the portrait of my father hanging on the wall. The man I had always wanted to honor through righteousness now seemed to look at me with disappointment. I closed the laptop, but I could not erase from my mind the voice of that American preacher saying, "Perfect love casts out all fear." In the days that followed, I returned to watching Charlie Kirk's videos. I told myself it was only intellectual curiosity, that I wanted to understand how Christians thought, maybe even find flaws to confirm my religious superiority. But the more I listened, the more something inside me began to crumble. I saw people sharing testimonies of transformation, forgiveness, and inner freedom, and I began to realize that despite all my power, I was the most imprisoned of them all. Guilt started to haunt me like a shadow. When I walked through the courthouse corridors, I saw the faces of those I had condemned. Sometimes I dreamed of them, hearing their cries echoing within the walls of my mind. I would wake up sweating, heart racing, trying to convince myself it was only stress, but I knew it wasn't. Something was calling me, something I could not control. The Massey family case was moving forward, the reports were ready, and all that remained was my signature. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt a void that consumed me. I remember looking at the photos attached to the case, the faces of simple people, brick workers, people who could never afford a decent lawyer. And I asked myself, what if they are innocent? The doubt I once considered heresy now felt like a divine whisper. I spent the day trying to drown that uneasiness in work, but with every sentence I read, Charlie Kirk's words returned to my mind. The truth sets you free. But first, it confronts you. I did not want to be confronted. I was the judge, not the one being judged, but that week I felt that the real trial was only beginning, and the defendant was me. On the eve of the verdict, I closed the curtains in my office, sat before the case file, and tried to focus. The voices in my mind argued among themselves, the judge, the man, the father, the believer. Each wanted to be right. And amid that conflict, something inside me began to crack for good. I felt that I was about to cross an invisible line, and that nothing would ever be the same on the other side. It was that night I realized the greatest court in the world was not in Lahore. It was inside me, and in that court I was no longer the judge. I was the accused. That morning, on the 23rd of August, the sun had not yet fully risen over Lahore when I entered my judicial chamber. The hallway was empty, my footsteps echoing in a way that felt almost sacred. I liked that solitude before the chaos, that brief moment when power seemed absolute, when only I and the verdict existed. On the table rested the Marcy case file, the document that would define the fate of 7 lives. I had woken before dawn, consumed by a restlessness that had haunted me since the night before. Charlie Kirk's words still echoed in my mind, especially the one where he said, "Truth is not just what you believe. It is what sets you free, even when it hurts." I tried to ignore that phrase, but it repeated inside me like a hammer striking hot metal. I sat in the heavy leather chair and opened the verdict. The words written there felt weighted with lead. Condemned to death for blasphemy. The letters seemed to dance before my eyes, and I felt something different. The air grew thick, hard to breathe. I ran my hand over my face, trying to shake off the fatigue, but the exhaustion went deeper than physical. It was as if something invisible surrounded me. A silent, real, almost tangible presence. Suddenly the noise of the city disappeared. No sounds of cars, no footsteps, not even the faint hum of the fan. Everything stopped. Time seemed suspended. Then I noticed a change in the room. A light began to appear behind me, soft at first, but growing with an intensity beyond description. I looked around, confused, searching for its source. There were no open windows, no lights turned on. Even so, the light grew stronger, filling the room with a golden glow, pure, alive, radiant. My entire body reacted, first heat, then a chill. It was as if every cell of my being recognized that presence before my mind could comprehend it. I tried to stand, but my legs were trembling. The light condensed before me, and within it, a figure began to appear. I swear I tried to rationalize it. I thought it was an illusion, extreme exhaustion, or even a trick of the enemy meant to confuse me. But it was not. What I saw was real. He was there. He was not the Isa I had learned about in religious books. He was not the silent prophet of the scriptures I thought I knew. He was someone different, indescribable. What I saw before me was Jesus. His eyes pierced through me like a blade, but without pain. It was something far worse, and at the same time, infinitely more beautiful. In them, I saw everything I was, everything I had done, every life I had touched and destroyed. It was as if he showed me my own soul reflected in every face I had condemned. I saw the men who had begged for mercy, the women who had wept for their husbands, the children who had grown up without fathers because of me. But surprisingly, there was no hatred in his eyes. There was pain, there was compassion. That mixture shattered me. I tried to look away, but I could not. His presence surrounded me, filling the air, the walls, the floor. Everything that existed in that moment was him and me. Then, without moving his lips, without any sound, I heard a voice. It did not come from outside, but from within. A voice that used no words, yet spoke directly to my heart. "Karim, why do you persecute me?" Those words echoed inside me like thunder. I fell to my knees, powerless. The tears came like a flood, violent, pure, unstoppable. I, the man who never cried, the judge who pronounced death over others without hesitation, now sobbed like a child. And then the visions began. It was as if every sentence I had ever signed materialized before me. I saw the courtrooms, the prisoners being led away, the families kneeling in prayer, the fires burning in the villages, the screams, the fear, the despair. And among all those images, there was a single invisible thread, a group of people praying for me. Yes, praying for me. I saw the Massey family. The father, Samuel, was on his knees, his hands raised, praying that the heart of the judge would be touched by the true God. He was not praying for himself, but for me, the one who would decree his death. I could not bear it. Each of his tears fell like fire upon my conscience. The light grew even stronger, and at that moment I understood that it was not a symbolic vision. It was a real judgment. I was standing before truth, before love, before Christ. And there, on the cold floor of the chamber, the man who had judged others was finally judged, not by the law of men, but by the love of God. When I came back to myself, the clock showed 8:30. There were 30 minutes left before the hearing. I was drenched in sweat, my clothes clinging to my body and my hands were still trembling. The air in the room felt lighter, as if something invisible had been removed. For a moment I thought it had all been a dream, but the papers on the desk were wet, soaked by my tears. I picked up the verdict. Those cold words, written the night before, now seemed like poison. I tore each page with my own hands, one by one, until only pieces were scattered across the floor. I felt a mixture of fear and liberation. It was as if I were not only tearing apart the document, but also the old version of myself. I took a blank sheet. I breathed deeply and began to write again. But this time the words did not come from my mind, they came from my heart. I wrote about mercy, about truth, about justice born from love, not hate. And in the end, I wrote the sentence that would change my life. Innocent, cleared of all charges. I knew what that meant. I knew the price I would pay. In Pakistan, acquitting someone accused of blasphemy is more dangerous than committing the crime itself. But at that moment, fear vanished. The heat I had felt during the vision still burned inside me, but now it was not destructive. It was a living flame. When the courtroom doors opened, the crowd flooded the chamber. Hundreds of people packed the space, eager for the verdict. On the right side, religious leaders and journalists waited for my words as if for a spectacle. On the left, the families of the accused trembled in silence, their eyes filled with tears. I walked in with firm steps. The robe felt lighter than ever. I sat down, looked at the people and began to speak. But this time I did not speak as a judge. I spoke as a man. For many years, I said, I believed justice meant punishment, that faith meant condemnation. But I have discovered that true justice begins when we learn to see others as God sees them. A murmur spread through the room. I continued, these people standing before us today are not enemies of faith. They are sons and daughters of the same Creator. Justice that kills the innocent is not justice, it is pride. And pride is the worst of all sins. As I spoke, I could feel the burning stares of anger upon me. Some shouted, others laughed with contempt. But among the crowd, I saw the tearful eyes of Samuel Massey and his family. His daughter, a girl of about 10 years old, folded her hands and prayed in silence. That gave me strength. Then I announced, by the decision of this court, all defendants are acquitted. The courtroom exploded. Shouts, boos, applause, insults. The chaos was so great that the guards had to intervene. On one side, furious religious men called me a traitor. On the other, Christians wept and lifted their hands to heaven. But in the middle of that chaos, I felt a peace I had never known before. It was as if the weight of all the years had been lifted from me in a single moment. The Massey family fell to their knees, thanking God. Samuel lifted his eyes and looked at me, not with human gratitude, but with a divine love that pierced through my soul. I knew at that moment that my life would never be the same again. But the peace did not last long. That same afternoon, the rumors began. On local networks, in mosques, on the streets, Judge Karim has betrayed Islam. He has been bought by the West. He has become a Christian sympathizer. Within hours, my reputation, built over 2 decades, crumbled like a castle of sand. In the courthouse, colleagues who once praised me now avoided my gaze. The president of the court called me into a private meeting and said coldly, "Your decision was a disgrace. You have put the stability of the country at risk." But what he did not know was that the true balance had already been restored inside me. The threats began quietly. A note slipped under the door, a silent phone call in the middle of the night. Then came the letters. Some said, "You do not deserve to breathe the same air as the faithful." Others contained distorted verses, used as curses. At home, the atmosphere grew tense. Aisha cried every night. She begged me to retract my decision, to say I had been misunderstood. But I could not, because what I had experienced was not a passing emotion. It was a revelation. My daughter Fatima began avoiding my eyes. I saw shame on her face, no longer respect. Hassan, my eldest son, started confronting me. He said I had disgraced the family, that my name would be cursed forever. I tried to explain, to say that something greater had touched me, that the God I now knew was not the God of death, but the God of life. But they could not understand. At night, when everyone was asleep, I would lock myself in the office. I took the New Testament that a Christian lawyer had anonymously left on my desk and read it under the dim light of a lamp. Each word seemed to shine like fire on the paper. I read the Gospels in just a few days. Each page revealed a love so deep that I could hardly contain my tears. And yes, I continued watching Charlie Kirk's videos, but now it was not curiosity. It was thirst. He spoke about grace, about repentance, about the power of forgiveness. In one of the videos, he said something that marked me forever. God does not choose the perfect, he transforms the broken. Every time I heard that, I felt as though he was speaking directly to me. The judge who once believed himself invincible had become the most broken man in the world. While the entire country called me a traitor, inside me a new identity was being born, one I could not yet name, but that carried the certainty of having been touched by the truth. And even when fear tried to control me, even when the threats intensified, there was something within me that no human force could erase, a gentle yet constant voice that said, "Do not go back." I did not know it then, but that would only be the beginning of the most intense battle of my life, a war between the old judge and the new man who had just been born within me. I thought I had already faced everything a man could endure. I thought the worst was behind me, that after seeing Jesus before my eyes and choosing the truth, everything else would simply be consequence. Hard, yes, but bearable. I was wrong. The real test was still to come. I learned that faith is not measured when everything is peaceful, but when hell rises against you, and you still choose to stand firm. Months after the acquittal of the Marcy family, another case reached my desk. It was a young Hindu man accused of disrespecting a religious symbol. The evidence once again was weak, and deep down I knew I could not repeat the mistakes of my past. I acquitted him. I did what any just man would do, but to that world I was no longer a judge. The next morning I woke to the sound of voices in the street, shouting. The noise grew louder, the footsteps drew closer, and when I opened the curtain, I saw the crowd. Hundreds of people, perhaps thousands, carrying signs, stones, and fire in their eyes. "Apostate! Traitor to Islam! Enemy of God!" The words came in waves. My home, once a symbol of authority, had become the target of public fury. Aisha was crying, clutching the children. I knew that if I hid, the violence would only grow. So I did what few would understand. I opened the door. The heat of the sun and the hatred struck me at once. And there, in the middle of the street, as the voices roared around me, I lifted my head and said firmly, "I am a follower of Jesus Christ." For a second, silence fell over everything. It was as if the world had stopped. Then came the roar. The crowd exploded in fury. I saw stones being raised, faces twisted with hate, a storm of screams and insults. I thought it would be the end, but in the midst of the chaos I heard sirens. The police arrived before the tragedy could unfold. Some officers pushed me back inside and locked the doors. I survived, but I knew something had died that day. My former life, my career, my safety. It was all over. A few days later I was removed from the judiciary. The headlines called me a national disgrace, a judge sold to the West. Colleagues who once praised me now avoided even saying my name. I could no longer walk the streets. Neighbors turned their faces away, friends disappeared. And inside my own home, the atmosphere became a silent prison. Hassan, my eldest son, barely spoke to me. Fatima looked at me with a mix of confusion and anger. Only Amara, my youngest daughter, still approached me. She had curious eyes and a faith I could see slowly being born, even if she did not yet understand. Hunger came quickly. Our savings ran out. Aisha sold whatever she could, clothes, furniture, books. There were days when we had nothing but dry bread and water. Shame consumed me. I, the man who once had power over life and death, was now cleaning the floor of my own house, trying to silence the sound of my conscience. But it was in that valley that God began to work again. One night I received a visit from a tall man, dressed simply with sincere eyes. He introduced himself only as Pastor Elias. He said he was part of an underground church and had heard about my story. He brought a bag of food and a Bible in Urdu. "You are not alone, brother," he said. The word brother sounded strange to my ears, but in that instant I understood what it meant. I had lost the world, but gained an invisible family, a network of faith that stretched beyond the walls of fear. They were the ones who helped me escape. At dawn, with false documents, we crossed the border. Aisha held Amara by the hand, and I led Fatima and Hassan, who still looked at me with distrust. Behind us, we left not only a house, but an entire life. I remember looking back and seeing the sky over Lahore lit by torches and smoke. It was not only hatred burning, it was my old identity being consumed. We arrived in exile with empty hands. I was no longer a judge, nor a leader, nor a respected man. I was only a refugee with a stained name and a weary heart. I worked cleaning offices, washing bathrooms, carrying boxes in warehouses. Sometimes someone would recognize my face from social media and spit on the ground as they passed me. Other times, looks of pity hurt more than words. At home, tension filled the air. Hassan blamed me for everything. He said my Christian madness had destroyed our family. Fatima shut herself in silence. Aisha looked at me with a tired kind of love, a love that still existed, but was covered in fear. Only Amara, always her, kept the light. One night, while I was cleaning the floor of a shop, she came to me and said, "Father, when you talk about Jesus, your eyes shine." I cried, because for the first time, someone saw in me what I could not see myself, hope. But what truly set me free happened months later. I received an unexpected email from a Christian organization that helped refugees. The sender said that a family wanted to meet me. When I read the name, my whole body trembled. The Masi family. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to run. Another part knew that meeting was inevitable. We arranged to meet at a small community center. My heart was beating so fast, I thought I would faint. When the door opened and I saw Samuel Masi walk in, the world seemed to slow down. He was older now, his hair grey, but his eyes were the same. He smiled and walked toward me. I could not speak. I just bowed my head and began to cry. But he surprised me. Instead of accusing me, he embraced me tightly and said, "We call you brother." That phrase cut through everything. Years of guilt, fear, shame, hatred, all of it collapsed. I cried as I had never cried before. That man, who had every reason in the world to hate me, chose to forgive me. And in that embrace I understood what grace truly is. The real grace. Not the kind explained in words, but the kind that completely transforms whoever experiences it. After that day, something changed in me. I was no longer the judge carrying the weight of sentences, nor the exile running from his past. I became Timothy Rahman, a new man with a new purpose. I began helping local churches, serving quietly, sweeping rooms, translating documents. Gradually, people started hearing my story. I was invited to speak in small groups, then at conferences, until one day I received an invitation I never imagined, to testify before the United Nations about the injustices committed in my country. There I was, the man who once condemned the innocent, now speaking in defense of the persecuted. I said aloud, "True faith does not impose fear. True faith sets people free." And when I finished, the entire auditorium fell silent. During that same period, I founded a small relief fund for persecuted Christian families. Every donation, Every rescued life was a reminder that God can redeem even the hardest hearts. But the greatest miracle happened inside my own home. One day, I heard Amara whispering a prayer. She was giving her life to Christ. Without my noticing, faith had taken root in her heart. Later came Fatima, with tears in her eyes, saying she wanted to understand the God who had transformed her father. Even Aisha, who had always resisted, began allowing me to pray for her. Today, when I look back, I see a trail of mercy that only heaven could have drawn. I, the man who once believed in the power of law, discovered that grace is infinitely stronger. And every time I step onto a stage or speak to an audience, I always repeat the same sentence. It was through a simple video on the internet that Christ entered my life. If God used Charlie Kirk to reach me, he can use any means to reach you too.
And now that you've heard this powerful story, stop for a moment and think. If God was able to transform a hardened judge, someone who believed himself to be the very voice of justice, into a broken man filled with love, what can he not do in your life? Karim, now Timothy Rahman, proved that there is no heart too cold, no past too stained, and no mistake too great that the love of Christ cannot reach. The same Jesus who appeared in that courtroom, surrounded by light and forgiveness, is calling you right now. He does not ask for perfection. He asks for surrender. If while watching this video you felt something different, that peace in your chest, that desire to start again, do not ignore it. And if this testimony touched you, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. Leave your like. It helps this message reach even more people who need to hear that the love of God crosses borders, religions, and impossibilities. And get ready, because the video now appearing on your screen will impact you deeply. It is the testimony of an Iranian colonel who left Islam and was sentenced to death after watching Charlie Kirk and meeting Jesus. A real, intense, and life-changing story you cannot miss. Click and prepare your heart, because when God decides to act, not even the deepest darkness can resist the light. I'll see you there.